I've spent enough years on this earth to know one thing. Showing up matters more than anything else we do. Not the grand gestures or the pretty words, just being there when it counts. Funny how the simplest truth takes the longest to learn. And sometimes, the lesson comes from the strangest places. For me, it came from an animal I never expected to teach me anything at all. The lioness lay in the yellow grass, her belly heaving with labor. 50 meters away, 14 African wild dogs had formed a patient circle around her. They didn't attack. They waited, tongues lolling, eyes fixed on their weakened prey. Tom Archer pressed binoculars to his face. His hands trembled. She was alone out here. No pride sisters, no protection. Just dry grass and circling death. His satellite phone buzzed in his pocket. He silenced it without looking. The screen flashed a name he'd been avoiding for 6 years. The dogs tightened their circle. One stepped forward, then the ground shook. A shape emerged from the acacia shadows. 2 tons of white rhinoceros. Horn lowered, charging directly at the pack. Tom forgot to breathe. If this story speaks to you, we'd love to hear where you're watching from today. And if you haven't yet subscribed, we hope you'll consider joining us. It helps us keep sharing stories that matter. Thank you kindly. Tom Archer had spent 32 years on this continent, and he still couldn't explain what he'd just witnessed. He lowered the binoculars. His fingers ached from gripping them too tight. The rhino hadn't moved 2 tons of gray muscle standing between the lioness and the wild dogs like a wall that had no business being there. Beside him in the Land Rover, Daniel Omondi sat motionless. 15 years they'd worked together across the Mara, the Serengeti, the Okavango. Daniel had seen everything: charging elephants, leopards dropping from trees, crocodiles dragging wildebeest into the grumeti. But his colleague's face now held something Tom had never seen before. Not fear, something closer to wonder. "This doesn't happen," Tom said. His voice came out hoarse. Daniel didn't answer. His eyes stayed fixed on the rhino. Tom's hand drifted to his chest pocket. Inside, he felt the familiar weight of brass, his father's pocket watch, worn smooth by decades of handling. The old man had carried it through Korea, through 2 failed marriages, through a slow decline in a VA hospital where he'd died alone because nobody came. Tom had been in Tanzania when he got the call, 3 days too late. He pulled his hand away, focused on the lioness. She was still breathing, shallow, rapid. Her belly contracted visibly, another contraction. She'd be delivering soon, out here in the open, with 14 wild dogs circling at a distance and only a rhinoceros standing guard. A rhinoceros, an herbivore, protecting a predator. His satellite phone buzzed again in his pocket. The 3rd time this morning, Tom glanced at the screen. Sarah missed call. 3, his daughter, 8 months pregnant. Living in Virginia with a husband Tom had never met because he'd been tracking elephant migrations when the wedding invitations went out. 6 years since they'd spoken. 6 years since Margaret's funeral, when Sarah had stood across the grave and refused to look at him. He silenced the phone, slipped it back into his pocket. Later, he'd call later. After this resolved. The wild dogs were regrouping now. 12 of them had settled in the shade of a fever tree, tongues out, watching. The other 2 paced the perimeter, testing distances. The rhino shifted his weight. His breath came heavy, visible in the cool morning air. How long could he possibly stand there? The morning sun climbed higher. Heat shimmered off the savanna in waves that made the distant acacia trees ripple like reflections on water. Tom checked his watch. 2 hours since the rhino had appeared, 2 hours of standing motionless between the lioness and the pack. The wild dogs had stopped pacing. They lay in the shade now, conserving energy, but their eyes never left the gray shape guarding their prey. Tom had studied African wild dogs for 11 years. He knew their patience. They could wait all day, all night. They would outlast almost anything. But could they outlast a rhinoceros? Daniel passed him a canteen. Tom drank without taking his eyes off the scene. The water was warm, metallic. He barely tasted it. "We should document this," Daniel said quietly. "The university will want footage." Tom's hand moved toward the video camera mounted on the dashboard, then stopped. Something felt wrong about filming this. He couldn't explain why. "Later," he said. The lioness shifted position. Her sides contracted visibly, another contraction. Stronger than before. She panted, her tongue lolling, her golden fur matted with dust and dried grass. Tom estimated she'd been in labor for at least 6 hours now. Maybe longer. Out here, exposed, with no Pride sisters to protect her. He'd been tracking her for 2 weeks. Radio collar frequency 147.3. He'd named her Kira in his field notes, though naming subjects was against protocol. She'd been expelled from the Marsh Pride 3 months ago when a new coalition of males took over. Standard behavior, the new males would kill any cubs that weren't theirs, and pregnant females became targets. So Kira had run. Alone. Heavily pregnant. Wandering the Mara's edges, growing weaker each day. Tom had watched her decline through binoculars and thermal imaging and drone footage. He'd documented her shrinking muscle mass, her increasingly desperate hunts, her failure to catch anything larger than a hare. He'd documented everything. Done nothing. We observe. We don't interfere. His own rule. 30 years of it. The alpha female of the wild dog pack stood up. She was a lean animal, scarred across her muzzle, her coat patched with the distinctive black, white, and tan markings that made the species so recognizable. She took 3 steps toward the rhino. Stopped. Her ears rotated forward. The rhino lowered his horn slightly. His breath came out in a long, audible huff. The alpha female retreated. But Tom saw what she was doing. Testing, measuring response time, calculating. "They're probing," Daniel said. "Looking for weakness." Tom nodded. The dogs wouldn't attack head-on. They weren't built for direct confrontation with something this large. But they'd find the angles, the gaps, the moments when the rhino's attention wavered. His phone buzzed again. 4th time. Tom's jaw tightened. He pulled the phone from his pocket, ready to silence it, and his thumb froze over the screen. Not a call this time, a text message. "Sarah. Due date moved up. Doctor says any day now. Just thought you should know. No accusation, no anger, just information." He stared at the words until the screen dimmed. Just thought you should know. Like he was a distant relative, an acquaintance who might want to be informed, someone whose presence wasn't expected or particularly desired. The screen went black. Tom's reflection stared back at him, weathered face, gray stubble, eyes that looked older than 59. He put the phone away, below. 3 wild dogs had broken from the pack. They moved in a wide arc, circling toward Kira's exposed flank. The rhino tracked them with his small, dark eyes, but he couldn't watch all directions at once. The first dog darted in, low and fast, angling for the lioness's hindquarters. Kira snarled and swiped, her claws raked air too slow. The dog danced back, untouched. The second dog came from the opposite side. Kira spun, teeth bared, but her movements were labored, heavy. Her belly dragged as she turned. The rhino charged. 2 tons of muscle and bone thundering across 15 meters of dry grass. The dogs scattered like startled birds, yelping, tumbling over each other in their haste to escape. The rhino pulled up short, snorting, pawing the earth. Dust billowed around his massive feet. He turned and walked back to his position, stood there, resumed his watch. Tom realized his own heart was pounding. His palms were slick with sweat. "He can't keep doing that," Daniel said. "Every charge costs him energy. The dogs know it. They'll wear him down." Tom said nothing. His eyes stayed on the rhino's heaving sides, the foam forming at the corners of his mouth. The animal was already tired, and the sun wasn't even at its peak yet. By nightfall, the hyenas would come. He thought about Sarah's text. Due date moved up. Any day now, his first grandchild, entering the world while he sat in a Land Rover 6,000 miles away, watching a rhinoceros fight a battle that wasn't his. We observe, we don't interfere. His own rule, his whole life, built around it. The wild dogs were regrouping again. The alpha female's eyes glittered in the harsh light, patient, calculating. Behind her, at the edge of the fever tree shade, Tom spotted movement. New shapes emerging from the tall grass, not dogs. Spotted flanks, sloping backs, heavy jaws designed for crushing bone. Hyenas, 8 of them, already here. The first one lifted its muzzle and laughed that high, cackling sound that carried across the savanna like a promise of what was coming. The rhino's head swung toward the new threat. And for the first time, Tom noticed something in the animal's stance that looked almost like hesitation. The night came fast, the way it always did on the savanna. One moment the sky burned orange and crimson. The next, darkness swallowed everything. Tom sat in the Land Rover's passenger seat, night vision binoculars pressed to his face. The world glowed green through the lenses, the fever trees, the tall grass, the motionless bulk of the rhino standing guard over Kira. Daniel slept in the back seat, his snores soft and rhythmic. They'd agreed to take shifts. Tom had volunteered for the first watch. He knew he wouldn't sleep anyway. The wild dogs had retreated to the edge of the clearing, their bodies huddled together for warmth, but the hyenas had stayed closer. Tom counted them through the binoculars, 8 adults, their eyes reflecting the starlight like scattered coins. They were waiting for the rhino to tire, to make a mistake. Tom's shoulders ached from holding the binoculars steady. His lower back had gone stiff hours ago. He shifted position, wincing at the creak of his joints. 59 years old. When had that happened? He remembered being 30. Indestructible. Hiking 20 miles a day through the Serengeti without breaking a sweat. He remembered being 40, leading research expeditions that lasted months, surviving on 4 hours of sleep and black coffee. Now his knees predicted rain. His hands trembled when he was tired. And he was always tired, below. A hyena stood up. It approached the rhino in a slow, deliberate walk, not attacking, just testing. The rhino swung his horn toward the movement, and the hyena retreated. But the animal's sides were heaving harder now, even through the green glow of night vision. Tom could see the exhaustion building. The rhino had been standing for over 12 hours. No food, no water, no rest. Why are you doing this? The question gnawed at him. 32 years of studying animal behavior, and nothing in the literature explained this. Rhinos were territorial, aggressive, solitary. They had no evolutionary reason to protect another species, especially a predator that might one day hunt their calves. And yet, here he stood, hour after hour, defending a lioness he had no connection to. Tom thought about Margaret, the way she'd stood by him through 3 decades of absences, missed birthdays, broken promises, the way she'd waited at the window when he came home from field seasons, thinner each time, her smile never quite reaching her eyes. She'd defended him too, to her family, to Sarah, to herself. He's doing important work, she'd say. He's making a difference. Had he? Had any of it made a difference? The night crawled on. Tom's eyes burned from staring through the binoculars, but he couldn't look away. Twice more the hyenas probed, and twice more the rhino drove them back. His charges were slower now, shorter. He wasn't pursuing them as far. The wild dogs never moved. They knew what the hyenas were doing, wearing down the defender, testing his limits. When the rhino finally collapsed, they'd all move in together, around 3 a.m. Kira's contractions intensified. Tom watched through the binoculars as her body seized, her sides heaving in rhythmic waves. She'd been laboring for nearly 20 hours now, in the wild. Lionesses usually delivered within a few hours of active labor starting. Something was wrong. She panted heavily, her tongue lolling, her golden eyes glazed with exhaustion. Her back legs trembled with each contraction. Come on, Tom thought. Come on. He didn't know if he was talking to Kira or himself. The first cub emerged just as gray light began seeping into the eastern sky. A small, wet shape, blind and mewling, struggling against its mother's belly. Kira turned and began licking it clean, her movements mechanical, instinctive. Tom's hand went to his chest pocket, to the pocket watch. He remembered Sarah's birth. 31 years ago, in Missoula. He'd been driving back from a conference in Bozeman when Margaret's water broke. 3 hours of white-knuckled driving through a snowstorm, skidding on black ice, praying to make it in time. He'd made it with 20 minutes to spare, held Margaret's hand through the final push, watched his daughter enter the world, squalling and red-faced and perfect. That was the last time he'd shown up when it mattered. The second cub arrived an hour later, smaller than the first, but moving, alive. Then the third, as the sun climbed above the acacia grove. 3 cubs, nursing against their mother's belly while predators circled in the pale morning light. Tom's phone vibrated in his pocket. He pulled it out. The screen blazed too bright. He squinted at the notification. Sarah. I'm in labor. Started an hour ago. Just thought you should know. Not that you'll come. His breath caught. Not that you'll come. 5 words. 5 words that contained 6 years of silence. A missed wedding. A funeral where she'd stood across the grave and refused to look at him. His thumb hovered over the call button. He could hear Daniel stirring in the back seat, waking up for his shift. Call her. Right now. Tell her you're coming. But his thumb didn't move. Because what would he say? What could he possibly say that would matter? 6 years of absence couldn't be erased by a phone call. The damage was done. The wall was built. Besides, and here was the excuse. Smooth and familiar, this observation needed to be completed. The rhino behavior was unprecedented. The university would want documentation. He put the phone away. Daniel's voice came from behind him, thick with sleep. Anything happen? 3 cubs, Tom said. His voice sounded strange to his own ears. All alive, the rhinos still holding. Daniel leaned forward between the seats, squinting at the scene below. The sky was lightening rapidly now, pink and gold spreading across the horizon. Your shift, Tom said. I need coffee. He climbed out of the Land Rover before Daniel could respond. The morning air was cool against his face, carrying the smell of dust and dry grass and something else, the copper scent of birth. He walked a few steps away, his back to the vehicle. His phone felt heavy in his pocket. Not that you'll come. The words echoed in his skull. She was right. He wasn't going to come. He was going to stay here, documenting a rhinoceros, while his daughter gave birth to his grandchild 6,000 miles away, because that's what he did. That's who he was. He reached for the coffee thermos Daniel had packed. His hands were shaking. Behind him. Daniel's voice cut through the morning stillness. Tom, you need to see this. Tom turned. Daniel was standing at the Land Rover's hood, binoculars raised. "The rhino," Daniel said. "He's moving." Tom grabbed the binoculars and trained them on the clearing below. The rhino was walking. Not charging, not fleeing, walking. Slow, deliberate steps away from the position he'd held for nearly 18 hours. "He's abandoning her," Tom said. The words tasted bitter, but Daniel shook his head. "Watch." Tom watched. The rhino took 10 steps, stopped, turned his massive head back toward Kira, waited. The lioness lifted her muzzle. She was still lying in the grass, 3 cubs nursing against her belly. Her eyes tracked the rhino's movement. The rhino took another 10 steps, stopped again, looked back. Tom's breath caught. "He's not leaving," Daniel said quietly. "He's leading." The realization settled over Tom like cold water. The rhino wasn't abandoning his post. He was showing Kira where to go. Kira struggled to her feet. The movement was labored. She'd been in labor for over 20 hours, had delivered 3 cubs, hadn't eaten in at least 2 days. Her back legs trembled as she stood. She picked up the first cub in her mouth. The tiny creature dangled limply, eyes still sealed shut, mewling softly. She walked 10 meters, set the cub down gently in the grass, turned back. The second cub, another 10 meters, set down beside the first, the third. Tom found himself holding his breath as he watched her shuttle back and forth, each trip slower than the last. The rhino waited patiently at the head of this strange procession, occasionally huffing or pawing the ground when the hyenas drifted too close. "Where's he taking her?" Tom asked. Daniel pointed toward the northeast. "There's a spring-fed pool about 400 meters that direction, dense thicket around it. Good cover." Tom nodded slowly. He knew the spot. They'd documented a leopard den there 2 seasons ago. Thick vegetation, fresh water, natural shelter from aerial predators, a place where a weakened lioness could recover, where 3 blind cubs could grow strong enough to travel. The rhino knew this terrain. He'd lived here his entire life. He was leading her to safety. "He's doing the only thing that matters?" Daniel had said earlier, being there. Tom lowered the binoculars. His hands were trembling again, not from cold, not from exhaustion, from something else. Something he didn't want to name. His phone sat heavy in his pocket. "Not that you'll come. Sarah was in labor right now." This moment. While he stood here watching a rhinoceros lead a lioness across the savanna, his daughter was giving birth to his grandchild in a hospital room 6,000 miles away. Alone. Not alone, she had her husband, whoever he was. Tom had never met the man. He'd been tracking elephant migrations when the wedding invitations went out, and by the time he'd returned to base camp, the ceremony was over. "I'm sorry I couldn't make it." He'd written in the card he'd sent with a check. Work obligations. You understand. She hadn't cashed the check. She hadn't responded to the card. 3 months later, she'd changed her phone number. That was 6 years ago. Tom put the binoculars to his eyes again. Easier to watch the animals than to think about his daughter. The procession continued. Kira moved in an exhausting rhythm, pick up a cub, carry it 20 meters, set it down, return for the next. The rhino adjusted his pace to match hers, never getting too far ahead, never letting the hyenas close the gap. The wild dogs had risen from their resting spot. They followed at a distance, spread out in a loose formation, their painted coats rippling as they moved through the tall grass. 14 pairs of eyes watching. Waiting. The hyenas were bolder. They circled the edges of the moving group, probing for weaknesses. Twice. A young male darted in toward the cubs Kira had set down, and twice the rhino wheeled and charged, driving him back. Each charge was shorter than the last. The rhino's sides heaved with the effort. Foam had gathered at the corners of his mouth, and his movements had lost their earlier explosive power. He was running out of time. Tom checked his watch. 7:15 in the morning. At this pace, it would take another hour to reach the thicket, maybe longer. Could the rhino hold out that long? We should call this in, Daniel said. The research station will want to know what's happening. Tom nodded absently. His mind was elsewhere. Not that you'll come, 5 words. 5 words that carried the weight of every missed birthday, every empty seat at Christmas dinner, every phone call that went unreturned because he was in the field, because he was busy, because the research couldn't wait. The research had always come first. Margaret had understood or pretended to. Sarah had stopped pretending years ago. I missed your wedding because I was afraid. He'd written in the letter he'd never sent. Not of the deadline. Of standing in front of you and your mother and admitting I hadn't been the father you deserved. The truth, finally. Written on paper, stuffed in an envelope, buried in his field bag for 3 years. He'd never found the courage to mail it. Below. Kira stumbled. Her front legs buckled, and she went down on her chest, the cub in her mouth dropping into the grass. She lay there panting, sides heaving, eyes glazed. The rhino stopped, turned, stood watching her. For a long moment, nothing moved. The hyenas froze in place, calculating. The wild dogs spread wider, sensing opportunity. Tom's hand moved toward the Land Rover's horn. One blast would scatter them. Buy her time. Daniel's fingers closed around his wrist. Firm. Silent. They'd had this argument before. Yesterday. The day before. For 30 years. We observe. We don't interfere. Tom's hand fell away. Kira pushed herself up. The effort cost her. Tom could see it in the tremor of her muscles, the way her head hung low. But she stood. She picked up the fallen cub. She kept moving. The rhino resumed his slow march toward the thicket. Tom released a breath he hadn't known he was holding. She's strong, Daniel said. Stronger than she looks. So is Sarah, Tom thought. She had to be. I made sure of that. He remembered the day she'd graduated from college. He'd promised to be there, booked the flights, cleared his schedule. Then, a poaching crisis had erupted in northern Tanzania, 3 elephants killed in a single night, and he'd canceled everything to coordinate the response. He'd sent flowers, a card, a check. Margaret had gone alone, sat in the audience alone, watched their daughter walk across the stage alone. You weren't there, Dad. The words had followed him across continents, through field seasons and research grants and academic conferences, through his wife's illness and death and funeral. You weren't there. And he wouldn't be there now, either. Not for the birth of his grandchild. Not for the moment when Sarah became a mother, because he was here, watching animals, doing the only thing he knew how to do. The procession had covered half the distance to the thicket now. The sun was climbing higher, and with it came the heat, that oppressive, draining heat of the Mara's dry season. Tom felt sweat trickling down his back, soaking into his shirt. The rhino was suffering. His pace had slowed to a near crawl. His breath came in labored huffs that Tom could hear even from this distance. But he kept moving. Step after step. Never leaving Kira behind. Tom thought about his father. The old man had been a lot of things: a soldier, a drunk, a 3-time husband, but he'd never been present. Not really. He'd drifted through Tom's childhood like a ghost, appearing for holidays and birthdays when he remembered, disappearing for months when he didn't. Tom had sworn he'd be different. He'd be the father his old man never was. He'd show up. He'd be there. Instead, he'd become exactly what he'd feared, and the same absence, the same broken promises, the same silence. The pocket watch felt heavy against his chest. His father had carried it through Korea, had clutched it in his final days at the VA hospital. Alone in a room that smelled of antiseptic and decay, no one had come. Not Tom. Not anyone, because there was no one left who cared. Is that how I'll die? Tom wondered. Alone in some hospital bed, waiting for visitors who never come. He pushed the thought away, focused on the binoculars. The thicket was closer now, maybe 100 meters. Dense vegetation, green even in the dry season because of the underground spring. A good place, a safe place. If they could reach it. The hyenas had grown bolder in the last few minutes. They were circling tighter now, their whooping calls echoing across the savanna. The alpha female, a scarred, heavy-bodied animal, had moved to the front of the pack, her eyes fixed on the straggling cubs. She was calculating distances, timing her move. She's going to go for the cubs, Daniel said. When Kira sets them down for the next carry. Tom saw it too. The alpha female was positioning herself perfectly close enough to dart in, far enough to avoid the rhino's charge. The rhino can't cover all the angles, Daniel continued. He's too tired, too slow. Tom said nothing. His jaw ached from clenching. Below. Kira set down the cub she was carrying, turned to go back for the next one. The alpha female tensed. The rhino saw it. He swung toward her, horn lowered, but that left the other side exposed. A young male hyena, smaller, faster than the alpha, broke from cover on the opposite flank. He sprinted toward the unguarded cubs, jaws gaping, legs churning through the dry grass. Kira spun around. Too slow, too far away. The rhino wheeled, trying to intercept, but his momentum carried him the wrong direction. Tom's hand slammed down on the horn. The blast shattered the morning silence. Birds exploded from the fever trees. The wild dogs scattered. The hyenas froze mid-stride, ears flattening. The young male skidded to a halt 10 meters from the cubs. His eyes darted toward the Land Rover, confused, calculating. Then he turned and ran. The savanna fell silent. Tom's hand lifted slowly from the steering wheel. His heart hammered against his ribs. Daniel stared at him. You interfered, he said. Tom's mouth was dry. He tried to swallow and couldn't. I know. 30 years. Your own rule. I know. Daniel held his gaze for a long moment. Something shifted in his expression, not anger, not disappointment. Something else. About time, he said quietly. Tom turned back to the binoculars. His hands were shaking badly now. The hyenas had retreated to a safe distance, still watching, but wary. The wild dogs had scattered into the tall grass. Kira stood over her cubs, sides heaving. The rhino had returned to his position, breathing hard, foam dripping from his mouth. But they were still alive, all of them. And the thicket was only 80 meters away now. Tom reached into his pocket. His fingers closed around his phone. Not that you'll come. He pulled it out, stared at the blank screen. His thumb hovered over the power button. One press, one call. That's all it would take. But the hyenas were regrouping. The wild dogs were emerging from the grass. And Kira still had 80 meters to go. He put the phone away. Later, he told himself, after this is over, after she's safe, the same excuse he'd been making for 30 years, below. The rhino began to move again, slow, exhausted, but still moving. Kira picked up a cub and followed. 70 meters to go. The alpha female stepped out of the shadows. Her scarred muzzle pointed directly at the struggling procession. She wasn't retreating anymore. She was waiting. The alpha female didn't move. Tom watched through his binoculars as she stood motionless in the tall grass, her scarred muzzle pointed at the struggling procession. The other hyenas had fanned out behind her 7 adults. spread in a loose semicircle that blocked the path to the thicket. 60 meters to safety. 60 meters and a wall of spotted predators. The rhino stopped. His massive head swung slowly, taking in the new formation. His breath came in labored gasps now, each exhale visible as a cloud of moisture in the morning air. Behind him, Kira set down the cub she'd been carrying. She stood over her 3 offspring, sides heaving, teeth bared in a snarl that lacked any real threat. "They're cutting off the route," Daniel said. His voice was flat, clinical. "Forcing a confrontation." Tom's hand drifted toward the horn again, but he knew it wouldn't work twice. The hyenas had heard the blast, had seen no actual threat follow. They'd learned, adapted. The next time he tried, they'd ignore it. The alpha female took a step forward, then another. The rhino lowered his horn. For a long moment, nothing moved. The savanna held its breath. Tom could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears, could feel sweat running down his spine despite the morning cool. Then the alpha female charged. Not at Kira, not at the cubs, at the rhino himself. She came in low and fast, angling for his hindquarters where his horn couldn't reach. The rhino spun to meet her, but his movement was slow, too slow. She darted past his swinging head, snapped at his rear flank, and danced away before he could connect. Blood appeared on his gray hide. A thin line. Nothing serious, but a message. "We can reach you. We can hurt you." The second hyena came from the opposite side. The rhino wheeled again, driving her back. But the effort cost him. His back legs trembled as he turned. His breath came in ragged bursts. Tom's chest constricted. He gripped the binoculars so hard his knuckles went white. The hyenas were testing him, probing, wearing him down with feints and shallow attacks, forcing him to expend energy he didn't have. When he finally collapsed, they'd move in together on him, on Kira, on the cubs. "He can't hold them," Daniel said. "There are too many." Tom said nothing. His jaw ached from clenching. The third attack came simultaneously from 3 directions. 3 hyenas, darting in with perfect coordination, snapping at the rhino's legs, his belly, his face. He spun and charged and drove them back, but each movement was slower than the last. Each recovery took longer. Foam dripped from his mouth in thick strings. His sides heaved like bellows. The cut on his hindquarters had opened wider, blood matting his gray skin, and still he stood, still he faced them. Why, Tom thought again. Why are you doing this? She's nothing to you. Her cubs are nothing to you. Why are you bleeding for a stranger? But even as the question formed, he knew the answer didn't matter. The rhino wasn't calculating odds or weighing costs and benefits. He was simply doing what needed to be done. Standing where he needed to stand, protecting what needed protection. No excuses, no rationalizations. Just presence. The alpha female circled closer. She'd stopped charging now, conserving her energy. Her eyes never left the rhino's trembling legs. She was waiting for him to fall. And then the rhino did something Tom didn't expect. He charged, not at one hyena, at all of them. 2 tons of muscle and bone thundering across the savanna. Horn lowered. Legs pumping with a last burst of desperate energy. The hyenas scattered in 8 directions, yelping, tumbling over each other in surprise. The rhino didn't stop. He pursued the alpha female, driving her away from Kira's position, 20 meters, 40, 60. He drove her like a sheepdog drives a wolf, relentless and furious, until she was over 100 meters from the cubs. Then he turned and went after another one, and another. Tom's mouth fell open. His binoculars tracked the massive gray shape as it crashed through the tall grass, scattering hyenas like leaves in a storm. He's drawing them off, Daniel breathed. Buying her time. But it was more than that. Tom could see what the rhino was doing, creating a window. A few precious minutes when no predator stood between Kira and the thicket. The lioness saw it too. She grabbed the first cub in her mouth and ran. Not the careful, measured movements of before, this was a desperate sprint, her weakened legs churning through the grass, her golden eyes fixed on the dark line of vegetation ahead. She reached the thicket's edge, ducked into the dense cover, disappeared. Tommy held his breath. 15 seconds later, she emerged, empty-mouthed. Running back for the second cub. Out in the open savanna, the rhino was still fighting. The hyenas had regrouped, surrounding him now, but he was over 100 meters from Kira's position, too far for them to intercept without passing him first. Kira grabbed the second cub, ran, vanished into the thicket. Tom's hands were shaking. His heart pounded against his ribs. One more. Just one more. Kira emerged again. Her movements were staggering now she was running on pure adrenaline. Her body pushed far beyond its limits. She reached the third cub, scooped it up, turned toward the thicket. A young male hyena broke from the pack. He'd seen the opportunity the rhino was surrounded, too far away to intercept, and Kira was slow. So slow. The hyena sprinted toward her. 30 meters. 20. Tom's hand slammed down on the horn. The blast echoed across the savanna. The hyena skidded to a halt, ears flattening, eyes darting toward the Land Rover. Daniel didn't stop him this time. Kira kept running. She reached the thicket's edge, ducked under a low-hanging branch, disappeared into the green darkness. Tom released the horn. His hand dropped to his lap. It was over. She was safe. All 3 cubs were safe. Out in the open. The rhino stood motionless. The hyenas had backed off, confused by the horn blast, uncertain whether to pursue Kira into the dense vegetation or continue their assault on the exhausted defender. The alpha female made the decision for them. She turned away from the rhino, her body oriented toward the thicket where Kira had vanished. The cover was too dense, too dangerous. A lioness defending cubs in that kind of terrain would be nearly impossible to dislodge. The clan began to disperse. Easier prey elsewhere. The calculation had shifted. Tom watched through his binoculars as the hyenas melted into the tall grass, their spotted forms disappearing one by one until the savanna was empty except for the rhino. The massive animal stood alone in the morning light. His sides heaved. Blood ran from 3 separate wounds on his flanks and hindquarters. His legs trembled so badly Tom was amazed he was still standing. But he was standing. For a long moment, the rhino stayed motionless. His small eyes were fixed on the thicket where Kira had disappeared. Tom had the impression the animal was confirming something, making sure the job was done. Then, slowly, heavily, the rhino began to walk. Not toward the thicket, away from it, back toward the acacia grove on the eastern horizon. He didn't look back. Tom lowered the binoculars. His arms ached. His eyes burned. His whole body felt hollowed out, scraped raw by what he'd witnessed. In 40 years, Daniel said quietly. I have never seen anything like that. Tom didn't respond. He couldn't. He reached for his phone. He needed to call Sarah, right now, this moment. He'd witnessed something that had stripped away every excuse, every rationalization, every comfortable lie he'd been telling himself for 30 years. The rhino had stood for a stranger, had bled for a stranger, had nearly died for a stranger, and Tom couldn't even get on a plane for his own daughter. His thumb pressed the power button. Nothing happened. He pressed again, held it down. The screen stayed black. Dead battery. He hadn't charged it since yesterday morning. Tom stared at the blank screen. His reflection stared back weathered face, hollow eyes, the face of a man who had missed his last chance. "When did you last charge that?" Daniel asked. "Yesterday, before the watch started." Daniel checked his own phone. "Mine's at 8%. Not enough for an international call." Tom's hands began to shake, a tremor that started in his fingers and spread up his arms, into his chest, into his jaw. He didn't know if Sarah had delivered. He didn't know if she was okay. He didn't know if his grandchild had been born healthy or if something had gone wrong. He didn't know anything, and he had no way to find out until they returned to base camp and charged the phone. Another hour's drive, at least. Not that you'll come. The words echoed in his skull. Sarah had sent that text expecting nothing from him, expecting exactly what she'd received for 6 years' silence. Absence. The void where a father should have been. And he'd proven her right. Again, Tom's head fell forward, his forehead pressed against the Land Rover's dashboard. The plastic was warm from the sun, rough against his skin. He closed his eyes and saw the Rhino, 2 tons of muscle and blood and bone, standing guard through the night, fighting off predators, leading the way to safety, doing what needed to be done. No excuses, no rationalizations, no later, after this resolves, just showing up. "We need to get back to camp," Tom said. His voice came out hoarse, barely recognizable. "Now." Daniel was already moving toward the driver's seat. "I'll radio ahead. Have them fire up the satellite link." Tom climbed into the passenger seat. His body felt heavy, disconnected from itself. Through the windshield, he could see the Rhino in the distance, a gray shape walking slowly toward the acacia grove, growing smaller with each step. The animal had given everything, every ounce of strength, every reserve of energy. He'd stood when standing made no sense. He'd fought when fighting seemed futile, and Tom couldn't even keep his phone charged. The Land Rover's engine roared to life. Daniel threw it into gear, and they lurched forward, bouncing over the rough terrain toward the research camp. Tom gripped the door handle to steady himself. His other hand went to his chest pocket, to the familiar weight of his father's pocket watch. The old man had died alone. No one came. Was that Tom's future too? The camp appeared on the horizon, 3 canvas tents, a solar panel array, the satellite dish that linked them to the outside world. Tom was out of the Land Rover before Daniel had fully stopped. He ran toward the communications tent, his bad knee screaming in protest, dust kicking up around his boots. The satellite phone sat on the folding table, plugged into the solar charger. Tom grabbed it, powered it on. 3 bars of signal, full battery. His hands shook as he scrolled through the notifications. 17 missed calls, 8 voicemails. He pressed play on the first one. Patricia's voice. Margaret's sister filled the tent, tight with urgency. "Tom, where are you? Sarah's in labor. It started yesterday afternoon. There are complications, something with the cord. They're talking about emergency surgery. She's scared. Tom, she keeps asking where you are, for once in your life. Please, call." Tom's legs went weak. He grabbed the edge of the table to keep from falling. The second voicemail. Patricia, again. Her voice harder now. "It's been 6 hours. David says you're not answering. I don't know what you're doing out there that's more important than your daughter, but I hope it's worth it. I hope it's worth everything you've already lost." Third voicemail. Fourth. Each one worse than the last. By the 5th. Patricia had stopped leaving messages. David had taken over short, clipped updates delivered in a voice that made no effort to hide its contempt. "Baby's here. Girl, 7 pounds, 2 ounces. Sarah's in recovery. She's asking for her mother." Not her father. Her mother. The one who was dead because Tom hadn't been there for that either. Tom's hand trembled so badly he nearly dropped the phone. He lowered himself onto the camp stool, his legs refusing to hold him. Daniel appeared in the tent entrance. He took one look at Tom's face and understood. How bad? She delivered. Tom's voice came out hollow. There were complications. The cord was wrapped around the neck, and they're both okay, both stable. Daniel exhaled, but he didn't move from the entrance. His eyes stayed fixed on Tom's face. You should call her. Tom stared at the phone. Sarah's number glowed on the screen. One tap, that's all it would take. She doesn't want to hear from me. You know that for certain. I know her. Daniel stepped into the tent. His boots scraped against the hard-packed earth. No, you don't. You haven't known her for 6 years. You haven't known her since you decided elephants were more important than her wedding. Tom's jaw tightened. That's not fair. Fair. Daniel's voice rose. You want to talk about fair? Your daughter just went through a complicated delivery, alone, while you sat in a Land Rover watching animals. I was documenting. You were hiding. Daniel was close now, close enough that Tom could smell the dust on his clothes, the sweat, the faint trace of coffee from the thermos. Same as always. Hiding behind research, hiding behind deadlines, hiding behind your precious rules about observation and interference. Tom's hands clenched. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. Daniel cut him off. I've understood for 15 years. You're a coward, Tom. You always have been. The word hit Tom's chest like a fist. Coward. He opened his mouth to argue, but nothing came out. I watched you, Daniel continued. His voice had dropped, but the edge remained. All these years, I watched you choose this place over your family. Every single time. I watched you miss your daughter's wedding for 3 extra weeks of elephant data. Data that got you a footnote in someone else's paper. A footnote. Tom. That's what your daughter's wedding was worth to you. Tom's throat constricted. He tried to swallow and couldn't. I watched you miss your wife's last weeks. The final month of her life. And you were here. In Kenya. With me. Daniel's jaw worked. You told me it was urgent. Emergency funding meeting. Critical research window. And I believed you. I helped you make excuses. It was escape. Daniel's voice cracked. She was dying, and you couldn't face it, so you ran. You came here, and you hid, and you let her die without you. Tom's legs buckled. He caught himself against the table, but his grip slipped on the smooth surface. He went down. His knees hit the packed earth floor, hard. The impact jarred through his spine, but he barely felt it. He was on his knees in the dirt, a 59-year-old man, kneeling in the dust of a tent 6,000 miles from his family. Daniel looked down at him. The anger in his face hadn't faded. If anything, it had deepened. Margaret called me. Tom's head snapped up. 2 days before she died. She called the satellite phone because you weren't answering yours. Daniel's voice was steady now, each word deliberate. She asked me to tell you to come home. She was crying. Your wife, crying on the phone to a man she'd never met, begging him to convince her husband to come home and say goodbye. Tom's stomach heaved. He tasted bile at the back of his throat. I gave you the message. Daniel crouched down until he was eye level with Tom. I told you Margaret called. I told you she needed you. And you said, Tom remembered. The memory rose up like something rotting, unstoppable and foul. Tell her I'll call tomorrow. I need to finish the migration count. He'd finished the count, and Margaret had died 36 hours later, alone in a hospital room in Missoula while he tracked elephants across the Serengeti. You weren't there, Daniel said. You weren't there for your wife. You weren't there for your daughter. You weren't there for your daughter's wedding or your wife's funeral. And now your granddaughter is born. And where are you? Tom couldn't answer. His head hung. His chin touched his chest. Dust coated his pants where his knees pressed into the earth. "Standing in a tent in Kenya," Daniel finished. "Making excuses, same as always." The silence stretched. Outside, a bird called sharp, mocking. The canvas walls rippled in a hot breeze. "My father left when I was 12, Daniel said quietly. "Walked out the door one morning and never came back. No goodbye, no explanation, just gone." Tom couldn't lift his head. "I spent years hating him for that. Years wondering what I'd done wrong. What made him leave?" Daniel paused. "But at least my father was honest. At least he made a clean break. He didn't pretend. He didn't send cards and checks and promises he never kept. He didn't show up just enough to keep hope alive, then disappear again." Tom's eyes burned. His vision blurred. "You're worse than my father, Tom, because you keep your family waiting, you keep them hoping, and then you fail them, over and over, and they can never quite give up. Because maybe this time he'll show up. Maybe this time he'll choose us." Daniel stood. His shadow fell across Tom's hunched form. That rhino stood for 18 hours. He bled. He nearly died. For a stranger. For an animal that meant nothing to his survival. Daniel's voice was flat now, drained of emotion. "And you can't get on a plane for your own daughter." He turned and walked out of the tent. The canvas flap swung shut behind him. Tom knelt alone in the dirt. The phone lay on the table above him, still glowing with Sarah's number. The voicemails waited in the queue, Patricia's voice, David's contempt, the silence where his daughter's voice should have been. His hand fumbled at his chest pocket, found the pocket watch, pulled it out. He opened it. The brass case was warm from his body heat. Inside, the photograph of Sarah at 5 years old stared back at him. Pigtails, gap-toothed smile, sitting on his lap at a 4th of July picnic in Missoula. She'd been looking up at him when the photo was taken, looking at him like he was her whole world. When had she stopped looking at him like that? He knew the answer. 1,000 small moments, 1,000 broken promises. 1,000 times he'd chosen research over her, Kenya over her, anything over her. His father had carried this watch through Korea, through 2 failed marriages, through decades of absence. His father had died alone in a VA hospital. No visitors, no family, just a nurse who found him cold in the morning. Tom closed his eyes. The photograph pressed against his palm. That was his future. That was where he was headed. A room that smelled of antiseptic and regret, waiting for visitors who would never come. Because why would they? Why would Sarah come? After everything? Why would his granddaughter ever know him as anything other than a name on a birthday card? A check that arrived too late. A voice on a phone that promised and never delivered. He'd become his father. The very thing he'd sworn he'd never be. The tent was silent. The dust settled around his knees. Tom Archer, wildlife biologist, published in National Geographic, respected by colleagues across 3 continents, kneeling in the dirt, alone. The phone buzzed on the table above him. He didn't reach for it. He didn't move at all. What was the point? Tom didn't know how long he knelt there. Minutes, maybe longer. The dust had settled into the creases of his pants, worked its way into the fabric of his shirt where his knees pressed against the earth. The phone had stopped buzzing. He stared at the pocket watch in his hand, at the photograph inside. Sarah at 5, looking up at him with absolute trust. He'd failed that little girl. Failed her so completely that she'd grown into a woman who expected nothing from him. Who sent texts that said not that you'll come because she already knew the answer. But the photograph was still there. He'd carried it for 30 years, through every field season, every research trip, every absence. He'd never removed it. never replaced it with something else. Why? Because somewhere underneath the excuses and the rationalizations and the endless reasons why he couldn't be there, he still loved her, had always loved her, even when he was terrible at showing it. The rhino hadn't calculated whether Kira was worth saving, hadn't weighed the costs against the benefits. He'd simply seen something that needed protecting, and he'd stood. Tom had spent his entire life calculating, weighing, finding reasons why the research was more important, why the timing wasn't right, why tomorrow would be better than today. Tomorrow never came. He pushed himself up from the dirt. His knees ached, his back protested, but he stood. His field bag lay in the corner of the tent, stuffed with notebooks and equipment. He crossed to it, knelt again, and dug through the contents until his fingers found the crumpled envelope at the bottom. The letter he'd written 3 years ago. The night after Margaret's funeral, sitting in a tent just like this one, drunk on cheap whiskey and drowning in guilt. He'd never sent it. Tom opened the envelope, unfolded the paper. The creases were soft from handling, the ink slightly faded. Dear Sarah, I've started this letter more times than I can count. I never finish because I don't know how to apologize for everything I've done wrong. There's no explanation good enough. I missed your wedding because I was afraid, not of the research deadline, of standing in front of you and your mother and admitting that I hadn't been the father you deserved. I missed your mother's last weeks because I couldn't bear to watch her go. I told myself I was needed in Kenya, but I was running. I've always been running. I don't know if you can ever forgive me. I don't know if I deserve it. But I want you to know not a day goes by that I don't think about you. I think about you at 7, waiting at the window for me to come home. I think about you at 16, winning the science fair while I was in Tanzania. I think about you at 25, calling to tell me you'd met someone special, and me saying I'd call you back and not calling. I have failed you. Sarah. In every way that matters, but I love you. I have always loved you, even when I was terrible at showing it. Your father, Tom's hands trembled as he held the paper. 3 years. 3 years he'd carried these words, and he'd never found the courage to send them. What had he been waiting for? The perfect moment, the right words. There was no perfect moment. There never had been. He'd been hiding behind excuses his entire life. But the letter was still here. He'd written it. He'd kept it. Somewhere underneath all the failures. The man who loved his daughter was still there, still waiting to show up. Tom folded the letter carefully, tucked it into his shirt pocket, over his heart. This time, he wasn't going to mail it. He was going to deliver it himself. He stood, walked out of the tent into the harsh afternoon light. Daniel sat on a camp stool near the Land Rover, a cup of coffee in his hands. He didn't look up as Tom approached. "The charter," Tom said. His voice was steady now. "Is it still available?" Daniel's head lifted. His eyes searched Tom's face, looking for the familiar pattern, the hesitation, the excuses, the retreat. "Leaves from the Mara airstrip at 2. I called in a favor." Daniel paused. "They'll hold it for an hour, maybe 2. After that, they're gone." Tom checked his watch. 11:40. He had time, barely. "I'll need my passport. It's in the document case in my tent." Daniel set down his coffee, rose slowly from the stool. "You're actually going?" It wasn't a question, but it wasn't quite belief either. Yes. Why now? What changed? Tom thought about the rhino, about 18 hours of standing guard, about the wounds and the exhaustion and the absolute refusal to leave. "Nothing changed," he said. "I just stopped pretending." Daniel studied him for a long moment. Whatever he saw made him nod. "I'll handle the documentation. The university can wait for my report." "Thank you." And Tom extended his hand. "For everything, especially for what you said in there." Daniel took his hand, gripped it firmly. Somebody had to say it. I know. I needed to hear it. Tom paused. I'm sorry. For making you carry my weight all these years. For using you as an excuse to stay away. Daniel's jaw worked. He released Tom's hand. Go. Pack. You've got less than 3 hours to make that flight. Tom moved quickly. His tent, his duffel bag. He stuffed clothes into it without folding shirts, pants, whatever his hands found. His field notebooks stayed stacked on the cot. His research equipment remained where it was. 32 years of work. His life's purpose. It felt like nothing. Like shedding a skin he'd outgrown decades ago. The pocket watch went into his pocket. The letter stayed against his chest. He grabbed his bag and walked back to the Land Rover. Daniel was already in the driver's seat, engine running. Tom climbed into the passenger side. Through the windshield, he could see the Mara stretching to the horizon golden grass, scattered acacia, the endless sky he'd loved for 32 years. Ready? Daniel asked. Tom nodded. The Land Rover lurched forward. The camp fell away behind them. The airstrip was 20 minutes north, across terrain that would rattle his teeth and jar his spine. He didn't care. Somewhere in Virginia. His daughter was recovering from childbirth. His granddaughter was learning to breathe. And for the first time in 6 years. Tom Archer was going home. He pulled out his phone, scrolled to Sarah's number. His thumb hovered over the call button. Should he warn her? Give her time to prepare, or would she tell him not to come? He couldn't risk it. Couldn't give her the chance to close the door before he reached it. Better to show up unannounced. Better to stand in front of her and take whatever she needed to say. He put the phone away. The airstrip appeared ahead, a flat stretch of packed earth with a single-prop Cessna waiting at the end. The pilot stood by the wing, checking his clipboard. Tom was out of the Land Rover before it stopped. He grabbed his bag, turned back to Daniel. I'll send word. Let you know how it goes. Daniel nodded. Be the rhinoceros, Tom. Tom almost smiled. Almost. He walked toward the plane. The Cessna's cabin was cramped, smelling of aviation fuel and old leather. He strapped himself into the co-pilot's seat. The engine coughed to life. The propeller began to spin. Through the window, he watched Daniel's Land Rover grow smaller. The research camp, the Mara itself. 32 years, falling away beneath him. The plane banked north toward Nairobi. Tom reached into his bag and found his notebook. Tore out a blank page. 3 lines. That's all he wrote. I'm coming. I'm sorry. I love you. He folded the paper. Tucked it into his pocket alongside the longer letter. 2 messages. One from grief. One from hope. He'd give Sarah both. Let her decide what to do with them. The plane droned on. Below, the savanna gave way to farmland, then to the sprawl of Nairobi. 14 hours of connections ahead. Nairobi to Amsterdam. Amsterdam to Washington. Washington to Richmond. 14 hours to figure out what to say when he finally stood in front of his daughter. What if she refused to see him? Tom stood outside room 412. The hospital corridor smelled of antiseptic and floor wax. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Somewhere down the hall, a cart rattled a nurse making rounds. He'd been standing here for 3 minutes, maybe longer. His hand hovered over the door, unable to push. 30 hours of travel, 4 flights, 3 airports. He hadn't slept, hadn't shaved. His clothes were wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot, his whole body running on nothing but black coffee and something that felt like fear. In his left hand, he held a small bouquet of wildflowers, yellow and purple, bought from a bucket at the Richmond Airport gift shop. They looked wilted, pathetic, the wrong thing to bring. but he'd brought them anyway. Through the door, he heard a sound. A baby crying, thin, reedy. New, his granddaughter. Tom's hand closed around the handle. The metal was cold against his palm. He could still leave. Turn around. Take a cab back to the airport and disappear into Kenya, into the research that had always been his refuge. Not that you'll come. He pushed the door open. The room was small. Pale green walls. A single window with blinds half drawn. Late afternoon sunlight slanted across the floor in golden bars. Sarah lay in the hospital bed, propped against pillows. Her face was pale, drawn with exhaustion. Dark circles under her eyes. Her hair hung loose around her shoulders, darker than he remembered. Longer. In her arms, wrapped in a pale yellow blanket, was a newborn. Sarah looked up. Her eyes widened, then narrowed. Her mouth pressed into a hard line, the same expression he remembered from Margaret's funeral. When she'd stood across the grave and refused to meet his gaze, Tom stepped into the room. The door swung shut behind him. "I know I have no right." His voice came out rough, cracked from exhaustion. "I know it's too late, but I came." Sarah stared at him. 6 years of silence filled the space between them like smoke. The baby stirred in her arms, made a small sound, not quite a cry, not quite a coo, just breath, just life. "Her name is Margaret," Sarah said. Her voice was flat, guarded. "After Mom." Tom's throat closed. He nodded. Words wouldn't form. He pulled the letters from his pocket, both of them the one he'd written 3 years ago, and the 3 lines he'd scrawled on the plane. The paper was creased, worn from handling. He held them out. "I wrote these. The first one 3 years ago. I never sent it." He stopped, swallowed. "I was afraid. I've been afraid my whole life." Sarah didn't take the letters. She looked at them, then at his face. Her jaw worked. "Why now?" she asked. Why this time? Tom thought about the rhino. 18 hours of standing guard, blood on gray hide, the refusal to leave. "I watched something," he said. "In Kenya, an animal doing what I should have done years ago, showing up, staying, not running." He set the letters on the bedside table. His hand trembled. "I can't undo what I've done. I can't give you back the years I missed." His voice cracked. "But I'm here now, and I'm not leaving unless you tell me to." Sarah's eyes searched his face, looking for the lie, the excuse, the escape route he'd always found before. Tom had none to offer. The silence stretched. The baby made another small sound. "Do you want to hold her?" Sarah asked. Tom's legs nearly buckled. He crossed to the bed, sat carefully on the edge. Sarah shifted the bundle gently, carefully, into his arms. The baby weighed almost nothing. Her eyes were closed, her face scrunched, her tiny fingers curled into fists. She smelled like milk and powder and something else, something new. Tom held his granddaughter. He pulled out his father's pocket watch, opened it, showed Sarah the photograph inside her at 5 years old, sitting on his lap, looking up at him with absolute trust. "I never stopped carrying you," he said, "even when I should have been there in person." Sarah looked at the photograph. Her jaw trembled. Her hand reached out, rested on his arm, didn't squeeze, just rested. Outside the window, the Virginia sun was setting. Golden light filled the room, warm against Tom's weathered face. Somewhere in Kenya, a rhinoceros grazed peacefully beneath the same sun. And Thomas Archer, for the first time in 6 years, was exactly where he should have been all along. There is something quiet that stays with us after a story like this, something heavy and tender at the same time. It sits in the chest, familiar and unnamed. Many of us have carried things we never spoke aloud. Regrets folded into old letters never sent. Years lost to work that seemed urgent at the time. The weight of showing up too late. Or not at all. Some of us have been the one waiting by the window. Some of us have been the one who didn't come home. Perhaps you know what it feels like to love someone from a distance. To hold on to a photograph because it's easier than holding on to hope. To wonder if there's still time. It doesn't need to be resolved. Not tonight, not ever, perhaps. Some things we carry simply because they are ours to carry, and that is all right. The ache doesn't require an answer. It is allowed to rest, just as it is. Somewhere out there, a rhinoceros stands watch over something that isn't his to protect. Somewhere, a father holds his granddaughter for the first time, and somewhere, you are listening. Still here, still holding whatever you hold. Thank you for staying until the end. Thank you for letting this story sit with you a while,